At 2 a.m. in a frozen alley, a waitress pressed her hands against a dying man and heard a father's voice tell her not to save him the normal way. Rain-soaked pavement, a ruined white shirt, blood spreading in silence. Emma kneels beside a stranger whose life is slipping away, expecting panic, sirens, humanity. Instead, the phone answers with discipline and menace. No police, no movement, no witnesses. Minutes later, a silver-haired patriarch steps out of the dark like judgment itself. And in one glance, she sees it, not just a monster, but a father terrified for his son. That is where the tragedy begins.
The narrative began with the transmission. A subject was perishing in an alley adjacent to 5th Street. The catalyst was a woman's voice, which initiated a clandestine emergency procedure. A silence of 3 seconds followed her report, a measured interval indicating a psyche calibrated for extreme duress. That voice belonged to Emma Turner, age 28, her work uniform a testament to her exhaustion as she knelt beside the hemorrhaging man. A series of directives were issued, which she followed implicitly. Avoid official channels, do not alter his state. Most critically, conceal his location. Rationality demanded she terminate the call. She did not. To understand what follows, one must observe this city's hidden currents. We begin by charting the anatomy of a choice. Emma Turner's personal creed included a strict prohibition against engaging strangers in alleys. This was not born from a hardened worldview. Rather, it was the paradox of a deeply empathetic nature. Yet 12 years in a high-risk environment had honed her ability to distinguish manageable danger from absolute catastrophe. Her sense for peril was a visceral instinct. The man on the pavement, however, represented a force potent enough to shatter her own protocol. He lay prone on the wet asphalt, one arm outstretched in the ghost of a defensive gesture. What arrested her movement was a detail of profound incongruity. His suit, dark and impeccably tailored, a stark anomaly in this derelict setting. She had a practiced eye for affluence, even when marred by chaos. "Hey," she ventured, her approach cautious. She had been off the clock for 11 minutes, possessing $16 and a serving of soup for her dinner. These details were about to become relics of a former life. "Hey, are you conscious?" Silence was her only reply. She crouched, 2 fingers pressed to his carotid artery, a skill learned when her father collapsed when she was 12. It was her first lesson in utter helplessness. She detected a pulse, faint and erratic, but present. "Okay," she murmured, mastering her own breathing. "Okay, you're still here." Rolling him to his side, she confronted the evidence. A dark bloom of blood saturating his shirt. A wave of visceral rejection washed over her. This was no accident. This was the result of a deliberate act. "I need to call," she whispered, her phone in hand before a more ancient impulse seized control. This command originated from the limbic system, the arbiter of survival. Her eyes darted from the blood to the suit. She surveyed the unnaturally sterile alley, its emptiness suggesting it had been scoured clean. She ended the emergency call. Instead, her hand searched his jacket, seeking a wallet, a name, any data point to guide her next move. The wallet was substantial. Upon opening it, the driver's license was unmistakable. Ethan Sullivan, age 34. The listed address belonged to an opulent neighborhood. The back was empty. From behind the license, a business card fluttered to the ground. It bore no name or insignia, just a telephone number rendered in gold foil. Below it, 4 words were printed in crisp type. "For emergencies only. Call." Emma's gaze shifted from the card to the wounded man. She retrieved it. She made the call. It rang precisely twice. A voice answered, "Who is this?" The query was not a question, but a demand, delivered with an almost inhuman control. It was the sound of a judgment being rendered. "My name is Emma Turner. she responded, relieved. Her voice was steady. I'm an employee at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. I located a man. He is unconscious in the alley. His identification says Ethan Sullivan. This number was with it. I was uncertain how to proceed. His bleeding is severe and I... Stop! The single word silenced her. How much time has elapsed since discovery? 3, perhaps 4 minutes. Describe the hemorrhage. She swallowed. It's... Her hand pressed his side, feeling the slick heat and resisting nausea. It is substantial. He requires a hospital. He will not be transported to a hospital. The tone remained flat, devoid of emotion. You will not dial 911. You will not move him. A brief pause. Remain at your current position. Do not speak to anyone before my team is on site. Is that understood? Every logical faculty in Emma's mind screamed a warning. One does not command avoidance of the police unless the police represent a liability. One does not have teams on call at 3 a.m. for conventional purposes. All of her internal safeguards activated simultaneously. She remained on the line. Is that understood, Miss Turner? Yes, she replied, perfectly. 4 minutes. Then came the detail that would be seared into her memory. He did not disconnect. The line stayed open. He was silent, his breathing a form of acoustic surveillance, as if he had weaponized silence itself. Emma knelt into sharp cold, listening to a stranger breathe, and waited. At the 1 minute and 40-second mark, Ethan Sullivan awoke. His return to consciousness was immediate, bypassing the typical stages of recovery. It was the awakening of someone trained to minimize all weakness. His eyes opened, scanning his environment before his body had fully rebooted. His gaze located Emma and locked onto her with an intensity that felt tangible. Don't move, she advised, her voice even and low. You are injured. Help is arriving. Who? He rasped, then coughed. Who did you call? The number from your card. The shift in his expression was absolute. All confusion drained away, replaced by an emotion she could not decipher. It was an amalgam of cold reason, terror, and resignation, a look that gave her the first true measure of the night's fear. His hand shot out, his grip on her wrist like steel. How long ago? He demanded. 2 minutes, possibly less. Did he answer, or was it a subordinate? He answered directly. Ethan's eyes squeezed shut, his jaw muscles clenching. He was processing what she recognized as the acceptance of an inevitable, terrible outcome. Okay, he whispered. Okay, listen to me with extreme care. I'm listening. In approximately 2 minutes, vehicles will be here. You will observe unknown men doing things that will frighten you. His eyes opened, pinning her with their focus. You must show no fear. Do you understand? Who are these men? Can you do this? Yes or no? Emma met his stare. 12 years of diffusing volatile situations had given her a crucial skill. It was composure, the capacity to feel terror while projecting absolute calm. Yes, she said. He nodded slightly, his expression softening with what appeared to be regret. I am sorry that you were the one who found me. She could not reply before 3 black SUVs without license plates entered the alley in a precise, tactical formation. The maneuver was clearly practiced. Large, quiet men disembarked, their movements efficient and exact, as if waste was an alien concept. They advanced on Ethan, completely ignoring her, assessing him with clinical precision while speaking in a clipped shorthand she did not understand. One of them finally looked at her, his expression a perfect blank. Step back, he commanded. She obeyed. A 4th vehicle arrived then. It was larger, and its occupant moved with a different kind of power. He possessed a centered gravity that made everyone else appear to be in his orbit. He was an older man with silver hair, a dark overcoat worn over his clothes. His eyes fell on Ethan, then swept the alley. In that fleeting instant before his mask of control fell back into place, Emma saw it, the unvarnished terror of a father. Then the look was gone, and Vincent Sullivan strode to his son. Ethan. He knelt, his hand touching his son's cheek in a gesture so brief and intimate that Emma felt compelled to look away, as if she were intruding on a sacred rite. "I'm fine," Ethan said. "You are not fine." Vincent stood and turned, his gaze locking onto Emma as if he had known her location all along, as if he knew the precise patch of pavement on which she would stand. He approached her. Emma had faced intimidating men before, drunks and aggressors at her counter. She knew how to maintain her ground. She did so now. "You are the woman who called," he observed. It was a declaration, not a query. "Yes, Emma Turner." He was already aware of her name. He had known it from the moment she had spoken it. "Yes, sir." Vincent Sullivan studied her the way one might inspect a contract for a hidden clause, searching for any vulnerability. She did not avert her eyes. Ethan's warning echoed in her mind as she braced herself, her gaze locked with Vincent's. "What did he say upon waking?" Vincent's question cut through the tension. The interrogation was underway. She had a single, frantic heartbeat to create a fiction. "He asked if I was unharmed," she said. He seemed confused. His memory of the event was fragmented. For 4 long seconds, Vincent's stare bored into her, a textbook exercise in psychological dominance. Each second felt like an immense pressure. "Is that all?" he inquired. "That is all." A silence stretched, and then an almost imperceptible emotion flickered across his features. His gaze held no warmth, no praise, only a cold, methodical evaluation. It was the expression of a connoisseur of lies encountering a palatable truth. For Emma, it was impossible to gauge which was the more lethal proposition. "You made the correct decision, and my son is alive for it," Vincent stated, his tone heavy. "In every conceivable way," he added after a beat. "That is a thing I do not forget." The words emerged before she could suppress them, a core instinct defying all caution. "I was not aiming to be memorable. A reflex born of stark honesty, a feature of someone unable to maintain a pretense." The faintest signal of something registered on Vincent Sullivan's face. An infinitesimal change. "No," he conceded with deliberation. "I imagine you were not." He turned, his voice fracturing the quiet with orders. His agents moved with a disturbing efficiency, transferring Ethan to a stretcher and into the long black vehicle. The entire sequence concluded in under 3 minutes. Emma remained motionless, a phantom in the laneway, her expression a practiced void. As he entered the car, Vincent looked back. "Go home, Miss Turner. You'll be hearing from us." She forced her legs to obey, resisting the primal urge to flee. She walked 6 blocks, took the stairs, entered her apartment, and collapsed into a chair, not moving, her coat still fastened. The clock on the microwave displayed 2:49 a.m. She felt as though a decade and 32 minutes had elapsed. She was unmoored, suspended between thought and sensation, when her phone vibrated on the table. Unlisted number. Her heart hammered once, violently, before she accepted the call. "Miss Turner, this is Vincent Sullivan, using a secure line. At 2:49 in the morning, it was necessary to confirm you had returned." And profound coldness permeated her body. How did you know I was home? A moment of quiet. The timing made it probable. Her gaze scanned the street beneath, deceptively ordinary in the yellow glow of the lamps. After a long pause, she said, I'm home. Good. A weighted silence filled the air. When he is recovered, my son will wish to express his gratitude. I trust you will permit him to do so. Every fiber of her being urged her to decline, to sever the connection immediately. Survival itself insisted on it. Of course, she heard her own voice reply, the appeasing response of a trapped animal. Good. The subsequent pause felt more significant, more calculated. Miss Turner, a final matter. Yes. Regarding what you relayed to me about Ethan's words, I accepted it as fact. She offered no reply. It is critical you know I accepted it, he continued, because I chose to. Do you grasp the distinction? In her freezing apartment, Emma sat like a carving, her hands clenched. She grasped everything. The subtext was clear. He was aware of the falsehood and had deliberately overlooked it. His decision was a demonstration of control, a tactical maneuver that now tied her to him with an unspoken obligation. I understand, she exhaled. Good night, Miss Turner. Good night, Mr. Sullivan. For a long while afterward, she stayed still. A beverage grew cold on the table. Food was unthought of. The city produced its ambient rhythm as, in an alternate reality she had just breached, the man she drew from the brink was being made whole. She rotated her hands in her lap, examining them as if they were a stranger's. These were the hands that located a pulse on an unknown man's neck, that held a card bearing a number in gold leaf. They had applied pressure to a wound as a voice insisted on her silence and immobility. She surveyed the quiet existence she had meticulously constructed, and she understood in the 3 a.m. silence of her kitchen that it had been dismantled. The question that held sleep at bay was not what she did, but what was now coming for her. An answer, she sensed, was approaching, regardless of her readiness. The following morning, she reported to her job. What else could she do? Remain at home and fixate on a man whose voice felt like a glass splinter in her consciousness. For 11 years, Emma Turner had never been late with rent. Her method for staying afloat was direct. She was present. So she was present. Murphy's Diner at 6:45 in the morning carried the scent of scorched coffee and the delicate optimism that can only be found before 7 a.m. Before the day has had a chance to sour, Emma secured her apron, refilled the coffee, and fortified her mind against any thought of Vincent Sullivan. She would not contemplate the alley, nor Ethan's hand gripping her wrist, his voice from the darkness. I'm sorry it had to be you. Her mind became a citadel, concentrating solely on the order for table 4 and the malfunctioning friar. This meticulous, emotional shield remained intact until 9:17. It was then that the black car materialized. It did not park, but simply halted at the curb, framed perfectly by the window where she was standing with a coffee pot and a counterfeit smile. It lingered, its windows like polished black stone, and Emma continued pouring coffee for Mr. Delgato while her entire system sounded a silent, screaming alarm. Sweetheart, you are overfilling it, Mr. Delgato said softly. She ceased pouring. My apologies, Mr. Delgado. When she glanced again, the car was gone. It was nothing, she told herself. Just another dark sedan with tinted windows in a city teeming with them. Cars stop in front of diners constantly. She recited the rationalizations one over the other and found she believed none of them. At 11:40, her phone buzzed. Unknown. Her stomach plummeted. She went into the back corridor, into the aroma of bleach and old grease, and answered the call. Miss Turner. The voice was not Vincent's. This one registered as younger, smoother, its cordiality a careful construction. My name is Daniel. I represent the Sullivan family. Mr. Sullivan has requested a meeting for this afternoon. This afternoon, she repeated, the word hollow. Indeed, Mr. Ethan Sullivan wishes to speak with you, an arrangement made by Mr. Vincent Sullivan. My work concludes at 3, Emma responded flatly. A brief pause. Excellent. 4 o'clock is suitable. A vehicle will be dispatched to the diner. A car is not required. I can simply... A vehicle will be at the diner, Daniel reiterated, the pleasantry in his voice now underscored by the finality of a closing vault. We anticipate your presence at 3, Miss Turner. The connection severed. In the back corridor of Murphy's, Emma regarded her phone. The only rational course was to resume her duties. The luxury of quiet contemplation was not one she could afford. At 2:55, while refilling napkin holders, the door chimed. The man who entered was a dissonance in the diner's mundane composition. It was more than the impeccable suit or the bearing of a man who commanded his own atmosphere. It was his gaze. Dark and sweeping, it surveyed the room before it settled on her with the clinical precision of target acquisition. Miss Turner, he stated, I have arrived ahead of schedule. I assume this poses no issue. This was not the voice from the telephone. This was Ethan Sullivan, a man reborn, a reality removed from the broken form in the alley. He projected an aura that could seemingly bend the world to his will. You appear far more, she began, vertical than at our last encounter. Yes, he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. He stood there, requesting a portion of her time. In an instant, she perceived herself through his lens, the food-stained apron, the diner's aroma clinging to her, a pen tucked behind her ear, a smudge of grease on her arm. She was ill-prepared, inadequate. Allow me 5 minutes, she declared, the tone an instruction, not a plea. Turning away, she informed her manager of a family emergency with a steady voice. In the back, she splashed water on her face, meeting her own gaze in a cracked mirror for 10 seconds, gathering the fragmented aspects of her composure. To her reflection, she whispered, You are fine, a sentiment her own eyes would not accept. The mantra, You are fine. He is just a man, was an exercise in diminishing his imposing presence. When she emerged, Ethan waited with coffee, procured the 5 minutes she was absent. He rose at her approach, an archaic courtesy that felt like an electric shock. Your personal visit was unnecessary, she noted. I am aware, he said, his eyes locking with hers. In the dim diner light, she could read the topography of his trauma, the weariness etched into his features and a jaw clenched against lingering pain. I rarely engage in actions I am not required to, he stated, defining his presence as a deliberate act. Emma slid into the booth, an attempt to equalize their positions and still the tremor in her hands. Her question, how severe was it, was answered with a detached inventory of his trauma. 2 fractured ribs, a laceration requiring 22 stitches. He acknowledged its grim appearance, and she affirmed that she had presumed him dead. This shared proximity to death was the catalyst for his visit. It is why I am here, he explained. In 30 minutes, she had both preserved his life and deceived his father, a sequence of events he believed necessitated this meeting. He placed the word lied between them, unadorned. He understood the act for precisely what it was and its implications. She attempted to reframe it as a simple omission. I merely withheld the full details. In the calculus of Ethan's world, the distinction was irrelevant. He then revealed his insight, showing he had already grasped her reasoning, thus negating her need to explain. The only break in his composure was the restless motion of his hands on the mug. He had assessed her with perfect accuracy, a woman who acts decisively and holds her ground under pressure. He commented on her stillness during the assault, her capacity for assessment in a moment that would induce panic in others. She attributed it to 12 years of crisis management. "I am practiced," she said, and his rejoinder, "As am I," hinted at his own chronicle of survival. In the ensuing quiet, a silent understanding was forged between them. She then inquired if the attack was a random act, a question whose answer she had already deduced from his reaction to the gold number call. She only needed his verbal confirmation. He provided it with one word. No. It had been a targeted assault. He grasped that the assailants had targeted a known vulnerability, a protocol activated by that exact phone number. His expression hardened with a cold, analytical respect. "You deduced that," he observed, a statement rather than a question. She outlined her rationale. His inquiry about when she called, not if, exposed the call itself as the trigger. The ambush, she concluded, was a strategic lure designed to either ensnare his father or isolate him. Both scenarios required a deep, internal knowledge of the family's operations. Across from her, Ethan Sullivan placed his mug down with deliberate care, his expression a perfect, unreadable mask. "You are not what I anticipated," he conceded, having expected a conventional display of fear. "I am afraid," Emma countered, her voice unwavering. "I am exceptionally good at being afraid. I just refuse to let it govern my features while I am speaking with you." Her absolute dominion over her own terror seemed to fracture his composure. His facade shifted, the conditioning falling away to expose a sliver of the man beneath, the individual shaped by bloodline and circumstance. For a fleeting moment, she saw the true Ethan Sullivan. "My father wishes to meet with you again," he announced, and her reality seemed to pause. "Formally, at the residence tonight." He recategorized their first encounter as a mere field assessment, not a genuine meeting. This next engagement would be different. A formal pretense of gratitude that was, in truth, a profound psychological probe. Ethan selected his words like surgical tools. "He wants to understand you on a deeper level." The diner's familiar sounds dissolved into white noise. "Understand me," Emma echoed, testing the weight of the phrase. Ethan affirmed it. "You now possess information. No, my father needs to know the character of a person who would make that kind of decision." Her gaze drifted over the ordinary comforts of her life, the coffee urns, the laminated menus, the daily patrons, a world now bisected by his. She probed the boundaries of this new confinement. "And if I decline?" Ethan's reply was both placid and cruel. "You are free to decline, but I cannot pretend it would be without consequence." A refusal would leave a vacuum, a space his father would inevitably fill with his own grim conclusions, and that in itself would provoke a response. "So, there is no real choice," she observed with finality. "There is always a choice," Ethan corrected her. "My family simply excels at limiting the available options." The stark candor of his statement drew a raw, unfeigned laugh from her, a sound that seemed to startle him. Seeing the strategic landscape clearly for the first time, she capitulated. Fine, what time? 7. A vehicle would be sent. He then revealed he had come alone, that his father was not aware of this covert meeting. The admission was underscored by a minute stiffening of his posture, a microscopic signal of the personal risk involved. He is unaware you came here first, Emma noted. Correct. When she pressed him for his motive, his look was direct. Because I needed to speak with you before he did. He hesitated, the next words carrying a significant cost. So that whatever he may ask of you tonight, you can speak the truth about my words in the alley. I will manage the fallout. It was an astonishing tactical reversal. You want me to tell him the truth? She asked, her disbelief evident. I want you to be free of the burden of carrying a lie on my behalf, he clarified. Her thoughts churned, reevaluating every assumption she had made about him. He was offering her the truth as a form of protection, releasing her from a deception she had constructed to shield him. Why is this important to you? She pressed. I understand the price of holding secrets for my family, he replied. He concluded their exchange by standing and leaving an exorbitant amount of cash for his coffee, preempting any protest. I did not want that burden to begin for you because of me, he stated, moving toward the exit. She spoke his name, formal and sharp, Mr. Sullivan, halting him at the door. She posed the question that had been hanging in the space between them. What did you say to me in the alley, the part you wished for your father not to know? The diner seemed to hold its breath. From the doorway, Ethan Sullivan met her eyes and spoke in a tone intended only for her. I said I didn't know who was responsible, but I had a suspicion. A beat of silence followed. And I said I believed it might be someone from within. He departed, leaving her with the crushing gravity of his disclosure. She was now the keeper of a fatal secret, the existence of a traitor within a lethal dynastic empire. The narrative began in an alleyway where Ethan Sullivan bled from a wound inflicted by a surrogate brother. His father, the patriarch Vincent, remained ignorant that his own son had already identified the serpent in their nest. That toxic awareness was then transferred to Emma Turner, a waitress earning $6 an hour. Her reaction was a masterclass in emotional regulation. She completed her shift, cleaned her section, and waited. The car, an inevitable black sedan, appeared at 6:55. She deliberately ignored the license plate, knowing it was a transient detail. Entering the vehicle was a conscious decision, and Emma Turner was a woman who did not second-guess her choices once they were made. This profound sense of resolve was always preceded by a silent internal conflict of possibilities. Inside the car, she observed her familiar neighborhood dissolve into a landscape of affluence and authority, a journey across a threshold she could not recross. Ethan's words about his family's method of limiting the options resonated. A chillingly apt description of a world engineered for containment. She recognized her own entanglement, tracing its origin to that single pivotal phone call. The destination, however, was not the ostentatious fortress of a crime lord she had imagined. The residence was a refined brownstone, its understated elegance a signal of established generational power, a perfect facade of normalcy. An elderly woman, projecting the disarming warmth of a cherished grandmother, answered the door. Her name was Rosa, her tone a comforting and precisely calibrated welcome. As Emma entered, the heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound severing her connection to the world she knew. In that instant, at 6:58 on a Tuesday evening, Emma understood her life had been irrevocably fractured into two eras, all that had come before and whatever was about to happen next. With a deliberate, controlled gesture, she followed the attendant. The woman, Rosa, moved with a fluid grace, suggesting she was an integral, living component of the house itself. A professional spatial awareness alerted Emma to an architectural deception. The interior volume was far larger than the exterior dimensions suggested. This was a calculated design element intended to destabilize a visitor's sense of reality and subtly communicate that nothing within these confines was what it appeared to be. Before a set of large double doors, Rosa paused, knocked twice, and gave Turner a smile that was simultaneously reassuring and a perfect psychological vacuum, a masterful contradiction of social cues. After declining the offer of a drink, Turner was left in the quiet. She took one deep, methodical breath to suppress the rising physiological stress, then opened the doors herself. It was a minor assertion of agency in an environment where she possessed none. Vincent Sullivan was positioned at a window with his back to her, a posture of absolute authority that compelled her to cross his domain on his terms. The calculated silence that followed was a nonverbal assertion of his own significance, a message she understood with perfect clarity. When he finally turned, his composure was more refined than it had been in the alley. She mentally categorized the alley version as the raw material, and this man as the finished, polished article, a testament to his formidable self-control. Only his eyes were the same as they had been in the alley, their gaze still assessing and cataloging her. The arrangement of the chairs, absent a separating desk, was a strategic choice. A manufactured intimacy meant to leave her psychologically unguarded. No barriers stood between them. He began not with an inquiry, but with a statement of fact, a maneuver to establish his superior information. Emma blinked, realizing his son had already reported her initial refusal of the car. "My son, in time, tells me most things," Vincent stated, his voice level. The phrase "in time" was a dark implication of his methods for extracting information. He then prompted her to recount her conversation with Ethan. Her mind worked rapidly, weighing Ethan's appeal to tell him the truth against the palpable danger of her situation. She chose her words with immense care. "He expressed his gratitude," she began. "He spoke of his injury, of this meeting, and he asked me to convey the truth of what he said in the alley." A dense, weaponized silence descended upon the room. An absence of sound Vincent Sullivan wielded with surgical skill. "He did," he said, less a question than a confirmation of his own theories. "He said he suspected who was listening. He believed it might be someone on the inside," Emma reported, her voice adopting the flat, neutral tone she used to de-escalate confrontations at her job. It was a vocal shield, creating distance between herself and the verbal explosive she had just detonated. For 6 full seconds, Vincent remained perfectly still, a silence that exerted tremendous psychological pressure. He then moved to the window, turning his back to conceal his reaction to the confirmed betrayal. She was watching a man absorb a fundamental wound to his own world. "He told you this?" he asked, his voice directed at the glass. "A woman he encountered 4 hours ago." "I believe he told me precisely because I was a woman he met 4 hours ago," Emma countered, her insight sharp. "I am a waitress. I have no allegiance. Telling me cost him nothing within your hierarchy." He turned to face her, his expression that of a monarch hearing an unpleasant truth from a commoner that his own courtiers were too fearful to utter. "You are more perceptive than your appearance suggests," he observed. I appear precisely as I am, she replied, rejecting his attempt to categorize her. You are the one who assigned a meaning to it. The directness of this counter elicited the barest ghost of a smile, a brief, authentic glimmer of respect. That, she registered, was genuine. He resumed his seat, his methodology shifting from an interrogation to an inquiry. Tell me about your life, he said. The simple curiosity in the request was disarming. There is not a great deal to tell. The individuals worth knowing invariably say that, he answered, and began to probe her history. She had been at the diner for 12 years, since the age of 16. My mother became ill. We were in need of the money. Her personal history was delivered with the dispassion of a field report. A father's departure at age 8. A mother's death 4 years prior. It's just me. For Vincent, this isolation registered not as tragedy, but as a tactical asset. When asked about her presence, she cited routine. It's my shortcut home. I've walked it 1,000 times. And you stopped. I stopped. I don't know exactly why, I just did. In a final assertion of dominance, Vincent claimed ownership of her own subconscious mind. I do. Emma remained resolute. In his worldview, she lacked the calculated indifference necessary for survival, a conclusion he presented as clinical fact. She conceded this trait had been a past liability. He then reframed her compassion, transforming it into a debt by tying it to the life of his son. The very tenor of the room shifted. The phrase, my son's life, became less a statement and more a chain, forging an instant bond of obligation. Her immediate question was for the son's condition. Angry, Vincent stated, an assessment he clearly viewed as progress. For Ethan, pain was withdrawal, but rage was a sign of engagement with the world. An inscrutable emotion flickered across his face. He'll be fine. He then challenged the authenticity of her quiet, I'm glad. Yes, she affirmed with simplicity. Vincent's posture then adopted a performance of deep fatigue, a strategic shift from untouchable emperor to weary father, intended to lower her defenses. The exhaustion appeared to emanate from his very marrow. His question was blunt. What were her intentions regarding the information she now held? Her reply was a firm declaration of disengagement, an attempt to retreat into normalcy. She refused all terms, no money, no ties, no future involvement. Her part was over. She would not be a piece on his board. Vincent weaponized the subsequent silence, using the quiet as an instrument of pressure. The measured ticking of a clock became the room's sole occupant. He posited a chilling paradox. Her denial was the precise action a cunning infiltrator would take. I can't prove what I'm not, Emma replied, seeing the logic trap. He then made a show of choosing to trust her, a classic tactic to create a false alliance before delivering an inescapable truth. Her intentions, he made clear, were irrelevant. Her knowledge had already made her a player in a game she never agreed to join. She understood perfectly. A cold, sharp lucidity settled upon her. She perceived his words not as a threat, but as a statement of immutable reality. She began to catalog the facts that defined her as a liability: knowledge of the attack, presence in his sanctuary, private dialogue with the target. In Vincent Sullivan's world, such facts superseded motive. Others, lacking his reasons for restraint, would arrive at their own fatal conclusions. I'm a loose thread, she said, verbalizing that an enemy might identify her first. Vincent's expression gave nothing away. You aren't what I expected, he commented, echoing his son and revealing a shared, rigid framework for judging people. "What were you expecting?" she inquired. She admitted she had anticipated a bribe and had already rehearsed the internal war between her principles and her poverty. A faint smile lingered. And which would have won? Probably both, she acknowledged with stark self-knowledge. "I'm efficient," she added. Vincent stood, and the room's dynamic altered with the abruptness of a braking car. "I'm not offering you money," he clarified. "I'm offering you something else." He summoned Rosa, who entered with silent celerity. His low-voiced exchange with her was a deliberate performance, an invisible wall reinforcing Emma's status as an outsider under his complete authority. Rosa gave a single nod and departed. Vincent turned his attention back to Emma. "I want you to have this number, my personal line." He instructed her to call if she noticed the slightest irregularity, a command designed to cultivate paranoia. "Do you think I'm in danger?" she asked. "I think," Vincent said with chilling precision, "I would rather you had a way to reach me in 30 seconds and not need it than the reverse." At that exact moment, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of profound surprise. Emma understood instantly. Ethan was aware of a meeting, but not its subject, his mind racing to analyze the scene. "You told him?" Ethan's voice was an accusation aimed at her. "You ordered me to," she countered. A silent dialect passed between father and son, a shorthand developed over a lifetime. "Who do you believe it was?" Vincent's question landed with the force of a physical impact. The fractional hesitation before Ethan replied was the answer itself. He was calculating which truths were safe to speak. "Not in front of her," Ethan said, dismissing Emma with his gaze. "She remains," Vincent commanded. "She is a civilian," Ethan protested. "She ceased being a civilian when she dialed my number," Vincent declared, implying Emma knew this as well. He held his son's stare. "She remains." Emma observed the silent power struggle, deconstructing a world where stillness was a strategy and every second held potential. She met Ethan's gaze, offering no apology for his father's command. "Caruso," Ethan finally said, deploying the name to test its effect on an outsider. Vincent then provided context on Caruso's recent territorial ambitions. "You said to wait." Ethan's tone was flat but strained. "I stopped waiting. I acted last week without sanction," he confessed, the wound in his side, the clear price of his insubordination. "You acted," Vincent repeated, the words slow and weighted. "Without my approval?" "Yes." The silence that fell was dense with a 34-year history. This was no longer a matter of business. "Why?" Vincent asked, the quiet word a devastating blow. "Because I knew you would say no," Ethan replied. The look on Vincent's face was not rage, but the deep grief of knowing his own heir viewed his judgment as an impediment. It was the sorrow of a man seeing a reality he had actively ignored. "You suspected," Vincent stated precisely, "that Caruso had someone on the inside." Ethan's silence was his confession. Vincent turned away, his posture rigid as he began the deep work of reconfiguring his world. "How long?" he asked. 4 months, Ethan answered. The number seemed to settle on Vincent's shoulders like a physical weight, quantifying his son's secret rebellion. "And you said nothing?" "I lacked proof," Ethan countered. "Only a pattern, a suspicion, and a knife between my ribs." His voice cracked. "I didn't want to be wrong, Dad." The use of the title was a tactical shift from soldier to son, a plea for understanding over judgment. The change was palpable to Emma. Vincent turned back, his face a blend of absolute authority and paternal love, a combination she now realized was his default state. After a long moment observing his son, his focus shifted to Emma. "Miss Turner, I owe you a formal apology." She could only blink. "For what?" "For the circumstance you are now entangled in." He held her gaze. "You sought a simple passage and found a variable from which I cannot guarantee your safety until I know its scope." He paused. "For that I am responsible. It is not the reward a good deed deserves." Emma studied Vincent Sullivan, connecting the man before her to Ethan's words from the diner. "I did not want this process to begin for you due to my mother." The two men, despite their differences, shared a fierce, protective code toward the civilian who had fallen through a crack in their world. "Postpone the apology," Emma said. "Defer it until we have an outcome." Vincent watched her. "We," he repeated softly. She felt the gravity of that word and did not withdraw it. "We," she affirmed. The clock marked time as in a quiet house, a waitress established a new boundary, and the city outside remained oblivious. She thought of her apartment and her 11 years of guarded quiet. An image of a man in shadows, and the weight of an embossed card returned to her. The thought arrived that some shortcuts lead to unexpected places. A second thought followed. Perhaps that is acceptable. She left the Sullivan home at 9:47 and was at Murphy's Diner by 6:15 the next morning, maintaining the established pattern of Emma Turner. She was a person who managed impossible things by retreating into the mundane, because rent is indifferent to crisis. And yet, the fundamental geometry of her world had shifted, a change she began to perceive in small anomalies. The black car from the morning before was now a silver one. It was a new model with different plates parked further down the street. It was there upon her arrival and during her break. By her 1,100 hours check, it had been replaced by another vehicle in a new position. Without the heightened state of awareness Vincent Sullivan had mandated, she would have overlooked the pattern. She did not overlook it. She chose not to use the number, knowing instinctively that to report a manageable event would be read as panic. The performance of panic was a form of surrender she would not entertain. She logged the data. She maintained her routine. She observed. At 1,300 hours, a man took a seat at the counter, ordered coffee, and left a $20 bill for a $7 check without eye contact. Emma refilled his coffee twice with professional ease, noting his tactical position, back to a wall, clear sightline to the door, the posture of someone trained for public threats. After his departure, she discovered a folded note under his cup. With a practiced economy of motion, as one might sweep away insignificant debris, she palmed the note and concealed it, unread, within her apron. She proceeded to attend to table 6, replenished the shakers, and only then sought the cloistered quiet of the service hall. 4 words inscribed in a hand of stark precision presented a chilling directive. "Don't go home tonight." For a count of exactly 10 seconds, Emma was a statue in the corridor. Then, folding the message back into a neat square, she returned to the floor where 4 tables demanded her attention and the lunchtime patrons were an audience before whom she refused to fracture. At 1,400 hours, she placed a call to Vincent from the walk-in freezer, the most insulated space from prying ears, a chamber filled with the scent of cold refrigerant and the stark solitude of a secret being exchanged between vats of soup stock. His response was immediate. "The note," she began, dispensing with pleasantries. "Did it come from you?" A pregnant pause followed. "No." A cold dread coiled in her gut. A man left a note at my counter. It says, "Don't go home tonight." Give me his description. She provided a meticulous report. His physical profile, his placement, the $20 bill for a $7 tab. She could hear the faint sound of Vincent relaying her intel to another party in his room. The reply was a rapid, compressed transmission. Emma. The absence of her usual title was a minor concussive force, the first time he had ever used her given name. Confirm your location at the diner. Affirmative. My shift concludes at 1500 hours. You will not depart at 1500 hours. You are to remain inside until an operative makes contact. A beat. You will not accompany anyone who fails to use the passcode November. Acknowledge. November, she affirmed. Understood. Do not allow fear to compromise you. I'm not compromised, she replied reflexively before amending her statement. I am experiencing fear, but I remain functional. On his end, a sound that, from a different man, might have been a brief, appreciative exhale. Functionality is all that is required. Stay put. And so she stayed. She undertook a redundant cleaning of the coffee machines. She restocked napkin dispensers that were already full. When her manager inquired about her state, she claimed fatigue from a long week. Honey, it's Wednesday, the manager noted. Emma responded, exactly. At 3:22, the chime of the door signaled an arrival, and Ethan entered. The sight of him was a tactical surprise. She had mentally braced for a large, silent operative from the alley, an anonymous agent armed with a code word and a dark, idling car. She was unprepared for Ethan Sullivan, cloaked in a gray jacket and seemingly fueled by 4 hours of sleep and a substance far more potent than caffeine. November, he stated, severing her train of thought. That is the correct word, she confirmed. We must leave. Your father indicated he was sending support, but not you specifically. I made the decision to come myself. He gestured for her to precede him. Emma, we need to maintain momentum. For the second time in as many days, the apron, that symbol of her other life, was discarded. She offered her manager another vague story about a family emergency, receiving a look of profound skepticism regarding her rapidly deteriorating domestic situation. Outside, the vehicle awaited, its engine a subtle thrum. It was an older, anonymous sedan, a model engineered for urban camouflage. To her surprise, Ethan himself was behind the wheel. She slid into the passenger side as the world outside began to streak past, the door not yet fully latched. Who was the source of the note? She demanded. The source is currently unknown. His gaze was in constant motion, checking the mirrors with a paranoid cadence that she was beginning to recognize as his baseline state. But the courier you described, the methodology, the tradecraft, it signifies a professional, a phantom delivering a warning, which means they know I was at the alley last night. Correct? And their objective is to intimidate me. Their objective is to erase you, Ethan corrected, his voice devoid of inflection. There's a critical distinction. Frightened assets create noise. Erased assets become silent variables. He met her eyes. An unknown party is sanitizing the field before my father can locate the source of the rot. You represent a loose end. You understood that risk yesterday. You said almost those exact words. Because it was the truth then, and it is a more profound truth now. He executed a lane change with fluid, decisive motion. After you departed, my father initiated a series of discreet inquiries. He is hunting the informant inside our own structure, who is communicating with Caruso. and that informant is now aware that the ground is unstable beneath them. They lack specifics, only that my involvement is the cause. You were one of several catalysts, but your report from the alley, it forced the adversary's hand. He glanced at her. Which was the correct strategic move. It is imperative you understand that, but the consequence is that our time has expired. And desperation breeds carelessness, which is how we received the note, Emma surmised. She stared at her hands, which lay still in her lap. An image of her apartment materialized in her mind. The couch, the clock's digital glow, the window that overlooked a street of absolute normalcy. She contemplated the quiet existence she had meticulously constructed, now a casualty of the last 36 accelerated hours. What is our destination? She asked. A secure location while my father navigates the next 12 hours. A brief pause. My apologies. I am aware this was not a situation of your choosing. You apologize frequently. I have much for which to apologize. Stop, she commanded. I made my own choices. Do not diminish my agency by recasting my decisions as your personal guilt. He regarded her again, the look lingering well beyond the requirements of a mirror check, stretching into a moment of shared, silent communication. When his focus returned to the road, it was with the disquiet of a man interrupted in a private reflection. The transit lasted 20 minutes. The city's dense architecture dissolved, then reconstituted itself with a new identity. A different sector of the metropolis, a different urban rhythm. Still populated, yet subdued. The residential quietude of a place where the patterns of daily life are a shared, memorized script. Ethan parked, escorted her up the steps of an immaculate brownstone, produced a key from his coat, and held the door as she crossed the threshold. Is this your residence? She inquired. It is mine, he affirmed, drawing a line between this space and formal family estate. The distinction between this apartment and the Sullivan townhouse was immediate and stark. It was not a matter of wealth. This place was well appointed and comfortable, but of essence. His family's home was a curated exhibit. This was a shelter. Books were stacked horizontally atop vertical rows. A lone, unwashed coffee mug rested on a side table. His coat was draped over a chair at an angle that no domestic staff would ever permit. To her own surprise, an inconvenient and palpable sense of security began to settle over her. Make yourself at home, Ethan offered, already moving toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? A disclaimer, my culinary abilities are, while technically legal, of a morally dubious quality. I'm fine, she replied, just as her own body launched a sharp, painful rebuttal, a system running on pure adrenaline. On second thought, I'll have whatever you are preparing. She listened to the sounds of his activity, the opening of cabinets, the refrigerator's hum, the click of a burner igniting. As she sank into the sofa, she finally granted herself permission to cease all performance. Her head tilted back, her eyes closed, and she took 3 deliberate breaths, feeling them descend past the layers of anxiety to a quieter core within. Are you holding up? Ethan's voice carried from the kitchen. Yes, just keep talking about anything. Her gaze remained fixed on the ceiling. Tell me something that is not connected to this. For a moment, only the sound of utensil against pan filled the space. Then, I wanted to be an architect. She raised her head from the cushion. Is that the truth? Until the age of 19, I had an aptitude for it. The structural logic, the spatial reasoning. I was drawn to the idea of creating something permanent, something you could observe from the street decades later. Another pause. Then my grandfather's health declined. My father required my assistance, and architecture ceased to be a viable path. Do you regret it? At times, his honesty was so abrupt and unvarnished, she felt the unalloyed truth of it. There are moments I see a building I admire and allow myself to wonder, but the thought is always suppressed. He was now standing in the kitchen doorway. And you? What was your intended path? She observed him. It had been years since she was last asked that question. The query had vanished from her life around age 16, alongside the luxury of wanting anything that was not immediately practical. A teacher, she said, for elementary school. I used to conduct practice lessons for neighborhood children when I was 12. I would arrange a classroom in my living room and deliver my curriculum. She paused. My mother would watch and smile, not in mockery, but from an affection for my earnestness. A subtle transformation occurred in Ethan's expression, a softening toward a quiet tenderness. Why did you not pursue it? For the same reason you did not, she stated simply. Circumstances intervened. He held her gaze for an extended moment, his expression revealing something she hadn't witnessed before. This was not the analyst, nor the tactician, nor even the purveyor of cautious truths. This was something different, emanating from a place beneath the twin armors they both wore. He turned back to the kitchen without a word. She did not press the matter. He came back 10 minutes later bearing 2 bowls of pasta that, despite his self-effacing humor, were profoundly satisfying. Simple, warm, the kind of meal prepared with another's genuine hunger in mind. And she was famished. She ate without pretense, her capacity for performance completely exhausted. They ate in a silence that was, by all rational measures, comfortable. Damn it, Emma said finally, setting her bowl aside. I need his name. Ethan mirrored her action. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees in a gesture so identical to his father's that she registered it instantly. It was the inherited posture of a Sullivan man preparing to deliver a heavy truth. Marco Caruso controls the East Side. He has for approximately 8 years. He and my father had a compact, territories, finances, the standard architecture of a truce. The situation was stable. Ethan's jaw clenched. Then my father began to withdraw. The patriarch's transfer of 3 operations last year created the initial fissure. A rival, Caruso, interpreted this tactical shift as senescence, an invitation to press his advantage. The provocations were subtle, incursions masked by plausible deniability. Then, a pause in the narrative. The son's calculus shifted from coincidence to calculated assault. His response was a clinical act of counter-violence, the silent, complete neutralization of an enemy network. A signal of dominance dispatched without a point of origin. His focus fell to his hands, a physical manifestation of his internal conflict. He should have informed his father, a truth he acknowledged. The son had constructed a fiction of paternal protection to hide a more primal impulse. Into this unspoken space, Emma injected the diagnosis. It was a demonstration of autonomy. His gaze met hers, a silent affirmation of her analysis. She articulated his motive with the precision of a psychologist, not an accuser. It was a declaration of independence, a desire to operate beyond the father's sanction or shield. The subsequent silence felt charged, a sign she may have dissected the truth too bluntly. Yes, Ethan conceded, the admission a quiet exhale. It was precisely that. And a breach from within my own ranks informed Caruso of my actions. precipitating his retaliation. This is the nexus of our current state. Who else is aware of this internal leak? My father's 2 chief lieutenants, Luca and Dom, were briefed last night. Ethan's cadence shifted, becoming measured and freighted with caution. One man's loyalty is measured in 22 years of service, the other's in 15. And you trust them? They have my father's trust, he deflected. My question was about yours. Ethan met her stare. Luca holds my confidence. Dom is another matter, yet my skepticism is founded purely on intuition, a metric my father dismisses without empirical data. A quiet beat. He requires proof. Emma mentally completed the thought. Demanding proof from a man who knows he is under scrutiny is an exercise in futility. Exactly. She processed this dynamic. The meal concluded. A quietude descended on the apartment. The sound of a passing car drew her focus. A newly conditioned reflex, her breath held until the noise dissolved into the city's ambient hum. The warning, she began. Stay away from home tonight. If the message did not originate from your circle, it came from Caruso's, which confirms they know my identity. That is correct. Thus, the informant in your organization disclosed my existence to Caruso. Correct. This implies the source knew I was present at the estate, and that I was granted a private conference with your father. She paused. And they now fear the content of that conversation? Ethan observed her, his own thoughts veiled. Deconstruct your reasoning for me. The source perceives a fundamental shift occurred after last night's events. They lack specifics, being outside the room, but their known variables are these. A civilian woman discovers you, is brought to the patriarch's home for a meeting, and is subsequently released. Following this sequence, your father initiated a series of discreet calls, her gaze locked with his. Their objective is not to intimidate me because I pose a direct threat. They are attempting to intimidate me because the unknown variable of my knowledge makes me a liability. The resulting silence was palpably dense, electric with implication. You synthesized all of that, Ethan noted, his tone low. In perhaps 45 seconds? I have had an entire day for contemplation, she replied. There were considerable periods of downtime between serving coffee. Emma, he said, testing the name. The scenario you have just outlined is called leverage. If the informant's aggression is born from uncertainty, then the perception of what I know transforms me from a simple risk into a strategic asset. She gave a subtle nod. I grasped the concept. We must convey this to my father. Place the call! Ethan produced his phone. 2 rings later, Vincent's voice emerged, and Ethan announced, You are on speaker, setting the device on the table. It rested between them like a conduit, poised to merge 2 distinct, parallel realities. She has an insight, Ethan began. Emma leaned forward, articulating her entire logical progression for Vincent as she had for his son. A clinical, chronological, and emotionally detached analysis. The warning note is merely a symptom, not the disease. The core issue is the informant's motivation, and the power dynamic created by the gap between my actual knowledge and their fear of it. After she concluded, the line remained perfectly still. You are proposing, Vincent stated, that we weaponize this ambiguity as a form of bait. I am proposing the ambiguity is a pre-existing condition and our adversary is already acting upon it. The choice is not whether to play, but whether to react to his move or to command it. Another silence, this one more profound. Dom, Ethan said to his father, his voice soft. Do not, Vincent interjected. Dad, Emma has just provided a behavioral profile of an individual with knowledge of her presence at the house. awareness of your subsequent calls, and the operational speed to have her diner under surveillance by 1 p.m. This requires intimate access to your daily protocol. Luca does not possess your hour-to-hour itinerary. Dom does. The silence emanating from the phone now carried a new, colder gravity. Over the last 24 hours, Emma had come to recognize the varying textures of Vincent Sullivan's quiet, and this was the most severe she had yet encountered. This was not the silence of a strategist weighing options. It was that of a man confronting a treachery so profound it existed outside his conceptual framework. 22 years. For 22 years, Dom had stood at his right hand. "I require proof," Vincent said, his voice a flawless veneer of composure laid over a foundation of utter devastation. Emma averted her eyes from the phone, feeling as though she were trespassing on a moment of deep and private anguish. "I know," Ethan said. "I will acquire it. I have a stratagem." The patriarch demanded a coherent plan, one devoid of unilateral action, which signaled a recent and deliberate shift in his operational paradigm. A weighted pause ensued. Vincent then issued a directive that Emma, as the observer, immediately identified as a fundamental rupture in the established dynamic with his son. He insisted on hearing the plan first. As she watched Ethan, Emma was witnessing a tectonic shift in their relationship in real time, something she had previously only sensed. An internal barricade within Ethan Sullivan was dissolving, not through force, but with the quiet finality of a defense that had ceased to be necessary. "Emma is the stratagem," Ethan stated. The subject, Emma, became perfectly motionless. "She represents the single variable they cannot model or anticipate," he continued, his gaze holding hers. "The core of the play is to allow them to believe their intimidation campaign was successful. She will sever all overt connections to us. She is also the one operative they would never conceive of as an active agent, having already categorized and dismissed her as a waitress from 5th Street. He paused, and Dom, especially, will underestimate her. It is his nature to underestimate anyone who exists outside his world. "Ethan," Vincent's voice was sharp. "What is your precise proposal?" "A conversation," Ethan replied, "a seemingly fortuitous encounter between Dom and Emma, staged in a public venue he would never register as a potential threat. The objective is to engineer a scenario that compels him to form his own conclusions about the extent of her knowledge. It is an integrity test, designed to reveal his allegiance through his reaction." He paused. "She excels at this, father. Your 60-minute conference with her last night confirmed as much." The silence extended for 15 seconds, then 20. Emma marked each one, a cognitive exercise to process her new status as the central component in a strategy she had not yet sanctioned. "Miss Turner," Vincent's voice materialized from the speaker, "are you present? I am here. You will not be coerced into this role. I state that now before my son, so there can be no misunderstanding." A beat. "But I am compelled to ask, what is your intention?" Emma visualized the warning note beneath the cup. She pictured the silver sedan stationed across from her diner. She contemplated a man within Vincent Sullivan's most trusted circle for 22 years, who for 4 months had systematically funneled intelligence to the faction that nearly ended his son's life. She assessed the consequences of allowing such a betrayal to fester. She thought of her mother, a woman who lived by a doctrine of avoidance, her life a case study in silent capitulation. And then there was Emma, who lacked that gene, who instinctively moved toward a dying man in an alley, who delivered the unvarnished truth to Vincent Sullivan, and who, within the last 36 hours, had ceased to be invisible, Provide me with the dossier on Dom, she stated. She detected the slightest exhalation from Vincent, a microscopic shift in the atmospheric pressure on his end. A 61-year-old male, obsessive regarding details. A narcissist who believes himself a master reader of men. Restaurants are his preferred loci for meetings. He rotates between the same three. He has a reservation at Carmine's on Thursday. Thursday, Emma repeated. That provides a 2-day operational window. You are not obligated to do this, Ethan began. I am fully cognizant of my obligations, she interrupted him. Her eyes met his. Cease viewing me as a fragile liability. I have spent 12 years managing volatile men in enclosed environments. I am informing you that I can enter that restaurant and extract what you require. She paused. What I require is the complete intelligence portfolio you possess on him. His vocal patterns, his vanities, his triggers, his insecurities, and his psychological vulnerabilities. She looked toward the phone. I need this data from both of you. A quiet interval. Then Ethan responded, his voice almost a whisper. Agreed. And Vincent followed, his tone shifting from assessment to forged steel, an absolute compact. Agreed. Emma settled back into her chair. Outside, the city functioned in its oblivious state. Thursday was 2 days away. She had 48 hours to construct the ideal persona. A woman a man like Dom would perceive through the lens of his own expectations, blind to the reality beneath. For 12 years, she had been unseen. It was time to discover the tactical power of being misjudged. For 2 days, time became elastic, a unique agony before the unknown. On Wednesday, Emma was a wraith at her job, a portrait of calculated normalcy. Her movements were mechanical, a string of vacant smiles for patrons who shed her memory upon turning away. This was the precise persona Dom and Carusa's organization would expect. A frightened civilian, warned and compliant. At night, her kitchen table became a tactical post, with Ethan's voice providing a steady data stream over a secure line. She learned Domenico Ferraro, analyzing him as she did her work, through pattern, instinct, and the specific dialect of his ego. At 61, Dom was a holdover from the Sullivan organization's old guard, a fixture so constant he had become part of the background. His caution wasn't fear, but an ingrained institutional habit, a neural pathway worn deep by proximity to power. He saw himself as the syndicate's principal judge of character, a self-assessment Ethan's intelligence marked as a fatal flaw. His great vulnerability was vanity. He courted public recognition and dressed the part. He sought the approval, not of the young, but of experienced women who could appreciate a man of his stature. Since she was 16, 32-year-old Emma Turner had learned to weaponize the world's assumption that she was unremarkable and tired. She could construct, with surgical accuracy, the very mask a man like Dom would analyze and categorize within 30 seconds. Your goal is not to extract information from him, Ethan's somber voice instructed her on Wednesday evening. No direct inquiries. Simply occupy his space. Evolve into a person he wishes to speak at. Allow him to fill the silence. Men like Dom perceive a vacuum as an assault on their eminence. And when the Sullivans are mentioned, Emma replied, knowing it was unavoidable. He'll bring them up, Ethan confirmed. Betray a glimmer of apprehension. Let him believe the visit and the residence rattled you more than you let on. A pause followed. Faking that shouldn't prove difficult? No, she concurred. It won't. Emma. His vocal tone shifted. In 2 days, she had learned the topography of Ethan Sullivan's voice. She recognized the pressure drop preceding a true tempest. This was no longer about strategy. This was personal. If it feels off, you walk. No excuses, no explanations. You just go. Luca is at the establishment. I know. You've mentioned it 3 times. This makes the 4th time. Ethan? I will be fine. A silence. Get some sleep. You sound exhausted. His voice then dropped to a near whisper. You are not required to do this. I am aware, she thought. The 4th unspoken repetition. Good night. Oblivion took her for 4 hours. She awoke at 5, peering into the pre-dawn gloom. In the stillness, she began her mental exercise for mastering dread, confronting it directly, gauging the actual danger, not the shadow it cast. Worst case, Dom recognizes the ploy. He is more perceptive than the file suggests. Her disguise crumbles. In that event, she rises and exits. Luca is present. Vincent will manage the fallout. Best case, Dom reveals himself. He floods the void she provides. His ego, burnished by 22 years as the sharpest mind adjacent to the throne, errs and provides Vincent with what he needs. Between ruin and triumph lay the span of one dialogue. Emma Turner had been navigating fraught conversations since she was 12, always performing a role beyond her years. She was capable of this. She got up, made coffee, and prepared for Thursday. Carmine's was an establishment sure of its identity. Rich wood, crisp white tablecloths, and lighting that suggested every patron was on the brink of a pivotal decision. Emma arrived at 12:45, a lone diner requesting a table by the window, and was seated instantly, her bearing a carefully crafted armor of belonging. The operative requested sparkling water, her self-control unflinching. She refrained from surveying the area, trusting her handler was in position. Searching for him was a signal a man like Dom would instantly recognize and exploit. At 1:05, the subject appeared. Dom. The intelligence was correct. Heavier and softer than Vincent, with silver hair and a coat that communicated its cost with a quiet confidence. He navigated the restaurant with the unforced authority of its owner, greeting employees by name and acknowledging another table, a performance of ownership she knew was as much a construct as her own. His act was so polished, she doubted he recalled the person beneath it. He registered her before taking his seat. She sensed his gaze upon her for a mere fraction of a second, the exact duration a man requires to assess and classify. Her own focus, directed at the street outside, was a lure, time to swing back to his and create the flawless artifice of being caught unawares. She gave a brief, polite smile, the perfect mask of someone absorbed in private contemplation. He settled at his own table with 2 other men she assessed peripherally. She had finished her starter and was midway through her water when Dom enacted his plan. "Forgive my intrusion," he began, his voice a calibrated instrument of confident charm. "You seem to have been stood up. I'm familiar with that table." A knowing, disarming smile followed. "Domeno Ferraro, I trust I am not interrupting." "Emma," she answered, the omission of a surname suggesting an unstudied openness. Not waiting, just thinking. "May I join you?" He indicated the vacant chair opposite her. The hesitation she took before responding was timed to the millisecond. It was the pause of a person slightly uncertain yet receptive, before she replied, "Of course." He occupied the seat. A waiter instantly appeared, and he placed an order without consulting a menu, an overt demonstration of his dominion over the space. His inquiries had the feel of casual talk, a refined sympathy designed to make his subject feel understood, not interrogated. She offered him a tailored version of events, a narrative with roots in truth for easier defense, a waitress navigating an unusual week. Unusual how? He probed, his attention a warm, intense laser. And there it was. The cold mechanism of intelligence work whirring just beneath the charming exterior. I had an experience, she stated, her tone measured, her eyes falling to her glass while her expression completed the story. The subtle tension in her jaw was a well-rehearsed tell. I met some individuals I never expected to cross paths with, and I'm still processing it. What kind of individuals? His tone was light, feigning casual curiosity. Powerful. Her eyes met his directly. The type of power you don't even see until you're in its presence and it's too late. Dom met her stare, and she mentally partitioned her thoughts to analyze the raw data of his reaction. It was not surprise, but a sudden sharpening of focus, the way a predator's vision locks onto unexpected movement. That sounds disquieting, he ventured. It was illuminating, she countered, the words suspended between them. I believed I understood the way things work. I was mistaken. A moment passed, and now I know more than I ever wished to. 3 heartbeats of silence elapsed. In that interval, Dom Ferraro's subsequent behavior was a confession she would later relay word for word. A man with nothing to hide would have asked for more information. Instead, he smiled, smoothly changed course, and said, "Powerful people have many roles. Frequently, they are just men who mastered one skill very early in life." He did not ask what she discovered. He did not probe for any names. With an agility honed over 22 years, he redirected the conversation. In that single moment, Ethan's hypothesis became a certainty for Emma. She upheld the pretense for another 20 minutes, embodying the role of a troubled woman grappling with a new, perilous awareness. She ceded the floor to Dom, engineering pauses that he filled with practiced charisma, certain he was directing the encounter. She initiated the departure. She managed the handshake, the smile, and the exchange of courtesies with flawless execution, a performance that masked her actual verdict. Her heels tapped a sure cadence on the sidewalk as she departed Carmine's, and within half a block, Luca's figure materialized at her side, his gait falling into step with hers as if he had been there the whole time. "The vehicle is right around the corner," he said quietly. "I am aware," she replied. Luca cast a look at her. "I monitored the conversation." She halted. "You were wearing a wire." Mr. Sullivan insisted on confirmation. She mentally cataloged this fact, deciding anger was an unproductive emotion. Then he is already informed. "He's waiting," Luca confirmed. Both of them. The dark car, the city lights sliding past the glass, the Sullivan estate, the cold stone stairs, the imposing front door, the same cinematic sequence repeated. The door opened before they reached it. Rosa stood waiting. This time, Emma stepped inside without needing to steel herself. The hall's geography was now known territory, and the fear of the closing door had been subdued since Wednesday evening. Vincent and Ethan were standing as she came in. The pressure in the room was a tangible force, confirming they had listened to the entire meeting in real time. The specter of her discussion at Carmen's still hung in the air. She sat. They remained on their feet. "He never posed the question," she reported. "No," Vincent confirmed. "He did not. He deflected. He deployed an identical evasive maneuver on 2 occasions, when she hinted at possessing forbidden knowledge and when entities of power were named. Both times he steered the conversation sideways, arresting its forward momentum. The innocent mind seeks answers. The guilty mind reroutes the inquiry. "This is hardly conclusive," Vincent stated, his voice a blade of pure fact. "No," Emma agreed. But it was as Ethan foresaw, an act of either validation or acquittal. He offered no acquittal. The ensuing silence was a vacuum, deeper than any she had experienced in that house. She observed Vincent Sullivan weighing 22 years of allegiance against a 40-minute exchange engineered by a waitress during a $30 lunch he had underwritten. She allowed the gravity of the equation to settle, knowing some weights must first be fully borne to ever be released. From across the room, Ethan's gaze locked with hers. An unspoken transmission flowed between them, something deeper than language or mere understanding. It was a mutual recognition between two souls who, having traveled from opposite ends of a conflict, had reached the same bleak truth, only now grasping that their trajectories were always fated to intersect at this exact point. "I need to make a call," Vincent declared. "If you'll excuse me." He exited, the door closing with a soft click, not quite catching the latch. Emma could hear his voice from the hall, low and deliberate, uttering a name she didn't know. He repeated it once before the sound receded into nothing. Ethan crossed the room, claiming the chair his father had just left. At this proximity, she saw the profound exhaustion etched around his eyes, the artifact of 4 days under crushing strain. "You were right about his tendency to misjudge me," Emma said, her voice low. "I am aware. It was still infuriating," she confessed. "Despite it being the core of our strategy, despite my reliance on it." She examined her own hands. He looked straight at me and perceived zero threat. It took him all of 20 seconds. "And you leveraged that dismissal?" "I did, but it's vital you see the price of that leverage." She met his eyes. "I invested 12 years constructing that woman he couldn't see. I had only just started to think that persona didn't have to be my permanent reality." Ethan's expression was so utterly exposed it was almost painful to witness. "It doesn't," he said, his voice soft. "Have to be." She held his stare for another beat. With a single sharp nod, she broke contact, protecting something nascent and too fragile for direct observation. Vincent reappeared, hesitating at the threshold. In that brief, unguarded second, Emma glimpsed the father beneath the magnate, the human being inside the citadel of influence. Then his spine straightened, his emotional fortifications snapping back into place as he returned to his seat. "The matter is being managed," he stated. Emma understood not to probe for specifics. She had learned there were spheres of this world she could enter and those she could not. The resolution of Dom Ferrara was firmly within the latter, and she had no desire to trespass. "And Caruso?" Ethan inquired. "Caruso is a separate conflict for another time," Vincent replied, his gaze locked on his son. A new protocol was established: absolute transparency, and end to unilateral moves. Vincent let the silence expand, a void filled with the 22-year history of a strained father-son bond. Ethan assented to the new conditions, meeting his father's gaze. A palpable shift remade the room's atmosphere, a mutual acknowledgement that their 34-year dynamic had been permanently reconfigured by the past 4 days. It was not destroyed, but rather reforged, now stronger along the mended fault lines. "Agreed," Ethan repeated. Vincent nodded, redirecting his focus to Emma. "Miss Turner," he began, and then hesitated. He looked at her as a man whose lifelong mastery of words had just been rendered obsolete by the unforeseen. "I find myself without the appropriate vocabulary," he finally said, "for the totality of your conduct this week, all of it, every choice you've made since the alley." Emma started to formulate a response. Do not diminish it, he interjected softly. Permit me this. She became still. You entered a situation entirely disconnected from you. You then proceeded to execute every single decision with flawless precision, while under extreme duress, possessing no relevant experience, for no apparent motive beyond an inherent inability to overlook a person in peril. He paused. You used deceit as a shield for my son. You delivered the truth to me within my own sanctum. Today, you won a war of psychology that men in my world spend careers trying to master. You achieved this with a mere 48 hours of intel and the distinct composure of a person so consistently underestimated they have learned to forge it into a weapon. His words were quiet, measured, yet carried immense sincerity. I am indebted to you. This is not a sentiment I am sharing. It is an objective fact. Emma took a second to process his assessment. A memory surfaced, her mother, observing from a doorway as she marshaled the neighborhood children. It was trailed by another image, being 16 in a sterile medical room, followed by 12 years of perpetual motion, a strategy to avoid confronting the boundaries of her own world. Her thoughts cataloged the pivotal moments, a gold card, the gloom, the sensation of a human heartbeat, the decision to initiate a call. I require one thing, she stated. Vincent's attention was absolute. Name it. When this concludes, all of it, Caruso, Dom, and whatever follows, I require confirmation that it is unequivocally over. I need you to tell me so yourself. She drew a breath. I will not spend my life checking over my shoulder, wondering if that silver car remains a danger. You have my word, Vincent replied without hesitation. There was no pause, no calculation. It was the pledge of a man who knew some debts transcend mere currency. She nodded, stood, and collected her bag. She glanced at Ethan, who held her gaze with a look she first recognized in his apartment. It was the expression from behind his fortifications, a view she suspected had been granted to very few, if any, for a very long time. Thursday of next week, he said. She inclined her head slightly. A query. I thought I might stop by the diner for coffee. He maintained her gaze, and that small, authentic smile returned. If that's something you'd permit. Emma Turner observed Ethan Sullivan, the man she had discovered bleeding in an alley 4 days ago. A man from a reality so fundamentally alien to her own. She considered how architects become other things, how teachers become waitresses, and how a life can suddenly pivot onto an entirely new axis. Thursday, she affirmed. I'll hold a seat for you. She walked down the corridor. The associate Rosa was waiting by the exit. The car was running at the curb. The city persisted as it always does. Vast, unconcerned, and swarming with a million disconnected lives. None are supposed to intersect, yet all are only a single misstep from impact. She entered the car. She watched the familiar topography of her neighborhood slide back into focus. Her street, her building, the tiny fissure in the wall she'd meant to report for 3 months. The corner shop where the proprietor knew her order. Each detail was precisely as she had left it, unaltered. Her own internal topography, by contrast, had been radically transformed. She lacked a term for what she was evolving into. The ambiguity was acceptable. She had discovered this week that uncertainty is not synonymous with being lost. It can be the sensation that precedes the charting of a new map. A feeling that arises when an experience outgrows one's existing lexicon. She exited the car. She climbed the stairs. She entered the quiet of her own residence. She stood in the mundane daylight of a life that had not paused, but had been fundamentally reordered. She put her jacket away. She brewed coffee. She sat at her kitchen table, turning her hands palms up, and studied them one last time with the old inquiries. What were these hands made for? What is the point of this existence? What does a woman like me even represent? And for the first time in 12 years, she possessed a reply. She had intervened. She had navigated the shadows. She had made the call. She had remained. She had met Vincent Sullivan's stare, articulated the truth, refused to yield, and walked into peril, emerging with her identity intact and the stark awareness of a woman who understood, at 32, that her life had not been a training exercise for serving coffee. It had been for this. The coffee was ready. She poured a mug. She sat in the ordinary silence of her ordinary life, which was no longer ordinary and never would be. She felt no grief for what was gone and no dread for what was coming. Emma Turner had come to terms with many things in her life. This was not an armistice, but a state she would deliberately sustain with each new day. A wider reality, a more profound truth, the version of herself that defied her own conditioning. She was the one whose fingers shook on the gold card as she initiated the call that altered everything. She discovered a life on the edge of being snuffed out and pulled it back from the abyss. In that one action, spontaneous and unprompted, the unmoored drift of her own spirit found its anchor. It was not chance. It was not an anomaly. It was the necessary unfolding of the woman Emma Turner was always destined to become. Once the fortress she'd constructed around herself finally turned to dust.
Life lesson. A life changes forever the moment someone refuses to walk away. The first image is enough to understand everything. A wet alley, a tired woman in a diner apron, a man in an expensive suit collapsing against the ugliness of brick and rain. It is the kind of contrast cinema loves because it says without speaking that two worlds are about to collide. Emma Turner is moving through the ritual of ordinary exhaustion. Her shift is over. Her feet hurt. The city is cold. She is not searching for revelation, yet revelation is already waiting on the pavement. Ethan Sullivan lies there, half-conscious, bleeding through white fabric that should never have been exposed to a place like that. It would have been easy for the scene to become simply dramatic, but what gives it emotional gravity is Emma's decision to kneel. 1,000 people could have passed that alley in fiction and in life. Most would have hesitated, many would have kept going. Emma stops. That movement downward, that simple human gesture of lowering herself towards someone else's suffering, is the entire moral center of the story. Before that motion, she belongs to one life. After it, she belongs to another. This is the first great lesson. People imagine destiny as something high and grand, but sometimes destiny begins with a person kneeling in the dark because they cannot bear to leave someone there alone. Everything that follows only deepens the beauty and cruelty of that choice. The gold ink emergency card, Vincent's voice through the phone, Ethan waking with fear sharper than pain, the black SUV slicing into the alley, the father stepping out and briefly letting terror show on his face before authority seals it shut again. The story moves like a film that understands stillness as well as shock. Vincent's hand touching Ethan's face lasts only a moment, yet it contains years of love, pressure, disappointment, and unspoken history. Ethan's warning to Emma not to look frightened says more about his world than pages of exposition ever could. Every character enters the frame already carrying a private war. Emma alone comes from outside the visual language of that power. She brings with her the grammar of ordinary mercy. That makes her radically dangerous, though no one sees it yet. She does not wield status, she wields presence. And presence in stories like this, becomes transformative when it survives fear. That is the second lesson the narrative offers. Courage is not some cinematic pose. It is the discipline of remaining emotionally legible to oneself while chaos tries to rewrite the moment. Emma is frightened, yet she keeps seeing. She keeps choosing. She does not let spectacle blind her to humanity. That is why her lie in the alley matters so much. It is not a trick. It is an act of instinctive mercy. As the story widens from alley to townhouse, from rescue to suspicion, the emotional landscape becomes even more tragic. Vincent and Ethan love each other, but their love has hardened into forms shaped by hierarchy, secrecy, and inherited power. It is not false love. In some ways, it is more painful because it is real. Vincent's concern for Ethan is undeniable, but he has built a world in which concern arrives wearing the face of control. Ethan's devotion is also undeniable, but he has learned to protect himself through concealment and defiance. Their bond is strong enough to endure, yet not healthy enough to soften. Emma sees this almost immediately because she has not been trained to mistake strength strategic behavior for normal intimacy. Her life has made her observant in different ways. She recognizes the pauses, the calculations, the way truth circulates in fragments because full honesty feels dangerous inside their family. That is why she becomes a force in the story without ever becoming loud. She sees the emotional architecture, she sees the sadness under the strength, and she sees that being ordinary has prepared her better than privilege ever could. This leads to another essential lesson. The world often hides a person's deepest abilities inside the routines that seem smallest. Emma thinks she has simply been working, surviving, and getting by. In truth, she has been training. Her long, ordinary life has taught her how to read rooms, hold tension, and recognize what people reveal when they believe no one important is listening. By the time she sits across from danger and lets herself be underestimated, the transformation is complete. Not into someone new, but into a fuller version of herself. That is why the ending resonates. Emma returns to her apartment, to her kitchen, to the ordinary objects of a modest life, and none of them are meaningless anymore. The coffee cup, the table, her hands turned upward in the light. These things become symbols of a life she once believed was small. But the alley has rewritten that belief. She now knows that her life has always been large enough to hold courage, perception, restraint, and moral action. She did not become important because she entered a glamorous world. She became important because the moment of crisis finally exposed the truth of what she had always been. This is the final lesson, and perhaps the most beautiful. A human life is not measured by status or spectacle, but by the depth of its refusal to abandon another person when it would be easier to keep walking. Emma's greatness is not theatrical. It is moral. She stops, she stays, she sees, she bears the consequences, and she emerges with her name intact. That is what gives the story its ache. Not the danger, not even the betrayal, but the fact that in the middle of all that darkness, one woman still chooses not to walk away.